go ahead and get started. Thank you, everyone, for joining us with the Arizona Daily Star opinion chat with the candidates in the Ward 6 Democratic primary. Voting is underway, ballots have been mailed out, and the date of the election, if you'd like to vote in person, is August 3rd. So we have Miranda Schubert, Andres Portela III, who are challenging Steve Kozachik, who is the incumbent. So what we're going to do is I have some questions, and I'm sure you all have some questions. So if you wouldn't mind using the chat feature to pose your question, just write your question in there, and I will get in as many as we possibly can. So to begin with, I'd like to introduce Sarah Brown, who is our opinion coordinator, who will be in charge of the muting and all of that sort of stuff. And then Jill Jordan Spitz is our top newsroom leader. And
hi, everybody.
She is joining us as well. So I don't know if our president and publisher, John DiOrlando, is on the line. He said he was probably going to join us by phone. So welcome. And what we're going to do is give everyone about 2 minutes to do an opening statement. You'll have about a minute to do a closing statement. And we're going to, rather than debate style in terms of like you get 30 seconds and then you get 30 seconds, we're going to pose questions to all three of you in different orders, and be aware that we have an hour together. So say what you need to say, but just be mindful of the time. So Miranda, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself, and what is your top priority as a candidate for Ward 6?
Thanks, Sarah, and thanks to everybody who's here and taking time out of your day to tune in. My name is Miranda Schubert. I'm one of the candidates for the Ward 6 seat on Tucson City Council. I've worked at the U of A since 2018 as an academic advisor, and I also helped to start the union there, UCW Local 7065. Before that, I was at Pima Community College, also as an academic advisor. So really, in a lot of ways, how I learned about Tucson was through meeting Tucsonans one-to-one who were pursuing their educational, professional, life goals, navigating challenges. So really seeing the impact of systems that people have to navigate and how accessible or inaccessible those are. I've been renting a small place with my fiance, well, now she's my fiance, Amanda, in Armory Park. I've lived in Armory Park since 2019. What else? I have been on the board of Tucson Roller Derby for the past 5 years as head of operations. I also hosted a live feminist talk variety show called Lady Town at Hotel Congress, and I've been a DJ on KXCI. My top priority for City Council is to continue the community building that I started just in all of the different spaces I've been involved in Tucson in the past decade, and to really embody co-governance, humility, a strong focus on public service and earning the public's trust every day. I want people to feel welcome and that these systems are here to work for them, that we want to hear from people and that their opinions matter. And saying that in mind, knowing that there's an enormous asymmetry of privilege, that we're functioning within, and systemic racism. And I believe that local government's basic responsibility is to safeguard, the health and well-being of citizens, recognizing things like, racial justice is a public health issue, and that housing is a human right. So I'm really looking to coalition build and put my strong communication and listening skills to work to, work toward a better Tucson for all.
Thanks very much. Andres Portela III. Please go ahead.
Buenos dias, everyone. My name is Andres Portela. Can you restate the question for me? Because I think I want to just jump right in to the question.
Sure. The question, it's to introduce yourself, and the question is, what is your top priority specifically for Ward 6?
Okay, so my top priority lends a hand to my lived experience. So this is my home. I've lived in Tucson, between Tucson and Sierra Vista my whole life, 27 years of life. And this is what I know. I know my community. I know the love that I have for this space. Andres and Tanisha, my father and my mother, this is the space they chose to find love after meeting each other in a Taco Bell. They decided to raise their 5 kids here in this space. And yes, Taco Bell was a funny comment, but that's where they found love, and they found each other here. My father broke his spine in the military, so we really had to learn about economic development, accessing resources, but my mother became a 20-year business owner from that. And so respecting both of them and understanding the 3 generations deep my mother's family has had here, I'm rooting for home, housing opportunity, mobility justice, and environmental justice. But my whole career has been in housing. And so that's where I feel like I can fulfill the need that we have in mayor and council right now. Right now, we do not have someone with a core competency that is rooted in housing and keeping Tucsonans in place. And the city has really done an amazing job of making sure I'm educated on that. I as a first generation student, I found myself living in my car. So I had the experience of being homeless. And I think that informs kind of the work that I want to do about a housing first initiative, and making sure that we prioritize our homeless and we make sure that they can find place and home. But also I have 2 aging parents. So for me, it's how do we keep aging in placers in place? How do we make sure that we work with our county on property tax freeze? How do we do all of the things to make sure that if you want to live in your home long term, that you should be able to grow in that space? And also young families. How do we allow young families to enter a housing market that is becoming increasingly unaffordable here in the city of Tucson? I know my wife had the foresight to, and I've been with my wife since I was 13 years old. She had the amazing foresight to say, it's going to become really expensive to purchase in the city of Tucson, and our rent went from $500 to $800 in 2016, and we were able to use first-time homebuyer programs through the city of Tucson and purchase our home in Toomey Park. And what was extremely important about that is we had to understand what resources were available to us. And so for me, it's making sure that our community has access and opportunity to those resources, like first-time homebuyer programs, making sure they can feel supported and live intergenerationally, making sure that our aging in placers can find place and home in something that they've known for 30, 40, 50 years. Those are my priorities.
I'm gonna stop you there.
Perfect. That's
And
cool.
and Steve, Mr. Kozacek, what is, if you'd introduce yourself and do a short, what is your priority for Ward 6?
Sure, you bet. Thanks. And thank you for the 41 people, 38 people, other than 3 of us who've joined. I appreciate you caring enough about the community to carve out this time. I've been on the council since 2009. The reason I'm seeking your support and re-election is simply because we've got some fundamentally important issues that, frankly, I'm not done with. In terms of priority, numbers 1, 2, and 3 at the top of the list are water security, PFAS. We have an existentially important issue in water security in this community right now. I'm the guy who threw a flag on the Department of Defense, and 3M initiated litigation with our city infrastructure against product manufacturers of PFAS. It is a threat to our central well field. I hope we get into this more later on. I don't want to use all my 2 minutes talking about this, but it's a huge issue for the region. Sooner than later, we will be reliant on our groundwater. When we get to a tier 2 drought designation, shortage designation on Lake Mead, which is probably going to come in the next 1.5 years or 2 years, we're going to be losing 20%. Arizona is going to lose 20% of their CAP water. So PFAS is huge. We've got to roll out a 5G poles in the Midtown area right now. That's going to go region-wide. I'm in an ongoing discussion / battle with Verizon, AT&T, as to how do we make these compatible with our residential environment. We've got some very significant conversations right now in play with the Pima Association of Governments for extension of the RTA. Whether or not the city of Tucson decides to support that going forward or to go our own direction is a huge regional issue that we have that right now we're in the middle of that conversation on. Preservation, the Benedictine Monastery is probably a capstone to showing how you can do preservation of historic landmarks and also build our housing stock. When we began that conversation, the developer wanted to demolish that iconic monastery. Through some pretty hard negotiations, we got it preserved. And similarly, we had a very controversial Broadway widening issue, which is also RTA, that we were able to preserve about 100 different businesses along the north side of Broadway, which is going to be a big deal going forward. And we just passed that Sunshine Mile overlay in the last meeting. Recycle reuse, began the glass recycle program. We're on the verge of kicking in plastic recycling as well. Animal welfare, the other two also mentioned housing affordability, gun control. We're in a constant battle with the state legislature on preemption laws. And I see Sarah's time to shut me down. But yeah, so let me just summarize it by saying we have some very fundamentally important issues that are both of local and regional concern that it's not time for me to step away from at this point.
Thank you. So you've all sort of mentioned transportation, mobility, the Regional Transportation Authority. That is one of the biggest issues, I think, coming up and facing our community. So I'm curious, what are your thoughts on what should be a priority for a future Regional Transportation Authority? And then also, should, this is a little wonky, but it's really important, what changes need to be made or should be made to how the Regional Transportation Authority operates? In other words, should Tucson have more of a say in the RTA process than it currently does? Currently, it's every municipality has an equal say. Should Tucson have a greater say, weighted voting? And if not, would you support continuing with the RTA participation if things just stayed the same, status quo? I know that's kind of a big question, but there's a lot of material there. So Mr. Portilla, if you'd like to go first, that would be great.
Yes, I would love to go first. So you asked quite a few different questions, but I want to be very specific around the RTA process. Do I support the RTA process? Yes. Do I believe that we need a larger seat at the table? Yes. Do I believe that we need to back away from the table if we do not get that? No, I do not. I think really for the future of Tucson, for the future of Pima County, for the future of Southern Arizona, we need to widen the table. RTA focuses specifically on Pima County, which is great. I love it. We need to have those folks at the table, but I really think that we should take a regional approach this through all the way through Southern Arizona. And the reason I say that is because we take this approach with economic development. With economic development, you hear about the folks who come from Mexico, through Sierra Vista, through Nogales, through all of these border cities, and really what they do for our economy. But we also we don't talk about how they're using our built systems and infrastructure. And so really it's going to take a paired planning process. For RTA next, I really want to focus on what my community has asked me. I've knocked thousands of doors over the last few months, and everything that has been told to me, even my neighbor who has lived in his home for over 25 years has said, I can't remember the last time our street was repaved. And I know Miranda was in my neighborhood last week, and I'm pretty sure she saw the potholes. As bicyclists, we both have to look out for those quite a bit. So for me, it's how do we prioritize our neighborhood streets? How do we prioritize community? but also thinking holistically Pima County, but also regionally with Southern Arizona. So for me, it's a yes and. Yes, I'm going to advocate for a larger seat at the table for the city of Tucson. Yes, I'm going to advocate that we have a larger voice throughout Pima County, but I'm also going to say we need to bring more folks to the table with Southern Arizona.
And if, okay, thank you. Mr. Kozachik?
Sure. Look, any nearly 20-year-old regional policy can justify a facelift. The RTA was voter approved in 2006. We're coming up on the reauthorization. There's not a piece of public policy that's 20 going on 25 years old by the time, considering when they started talking about this and trying to pass it back in the early 2000s, that can't justify some sort of a restructuring. The city of Tucson is asking for changes. We're not trying to blow up a regional coalition. That's a misnomer that's being thrown around. But we've seen some significant inequities since 2006 that we believe can and should be addressed. One of them that Sarah, you asked about is weighted voting. Maricopa Association of Governments, the MAG model works. It's not mandatory that every time there's a vote that the city would get a weighted vote, 40% or whatever the number winds up being, but we ought to have it as an option. The reality is that the city of Tucson constitutes over 40% of both the population and the tax base. That ought to be reflected in how the votes are conducted. We also need to have more flexibility built into how the RTA operates. I mentioned the Broadway widening a few minutes ago. That was a completely unnecessary fiasco because by the time they got around to spending the $72 million that the RTA had allocated, it was determined that people weren't driving as much as the traffic projections had indicated, but we didn't need to go 8 lanes and 150 feet. But there was a very strong pushback from the cart board on the RTA that said you can't do any changes because this is what we told the voters. I think voters would appreciate seeing some flexibility and from decision makers to say, you know what, 15, 20 years ago, we had projected X, we're seeing Y, there's a more efficient way to spend your dollars. And so that's another thing. Pavement preservation is not a part of the current RTA. It absolutely has to be a part of any RTA going forward, or we should not support it. The allocation of dollars should mirror the city of Tucson's participation. When we were asked for a project list, we were told to cap our project list at $600 million. So was Marana, so was Oro Valley, so was South Tucson. That's completely foolish in terms of the ultimate allocation of projects for this city, that we're given the same level of projects in terms of finances as the rest of the jurisdictions. That's completely wrong. Categorical areas.
So
You stopping me?
I am.
All right.
But with
So going forward, are we doing 2-minute answers to these two? Maybe I missed that in your
roughly. I mean, I didn't give a
Okay,
specific
fair enough.
time, but roughly. So Mr. Kozachik, would you, if it doesn't change, would you advocate for Tucson's participation in the RTA going forward if it's just the way it is? Or
No, without those fundamental changes, the city of Tucson has a Move Tucson policy that we're involved with right now. It's our own 20-year mobility plan that if we are, look, we have almost $280 million of city projects that are unfunded. So the answer is no, not without those fundamental changes.
Okay, thank you. And Ms. Schubert.
Thanks. So in terms of things that I think need to be prioritized, I think that the community's been really clear for a long time about the need to more meaningfully invest in other modes of transportation besides just catering to cars. It's definitely important that we have adequate funding to repair and maintain roads. We all are aware of the condition of the roads and the need for a lot more investment in that infrastructure. We know that over half of our roads are in failing condition, but we also really need to look at how to make our city more easy to navigate for folks with different mobility needs, for folks without cars, bicyclists, so things like bicycle connectivity, pedestrian connectivity, more safety measures in place for pedestrians to be able to cross roads safely, and also green, more green infrastructure, more sustainability. These are priorities that are outlined in, Plan Tucson, in the Move Tucson Master Transportation Plan, repeatedly reflected in feedback that's gotten from the community. I'd also like to lift up the current petition that's being circulated by a local group called Families United Gaining Accessibility, where they have some clearly outlined priorities that I think are great places to start. So things like reimagining the Citizens Advisory Committee and ensuring that that's more, that includes more diverse representation of different stakeholders. It includes things like equitable distribution of resources, because some parts of town are much more in need of investment than others. In terms of changes to the weighted vote thing, I mean, I'm in line with the other two. I'm in line with Karen Ulick, who said, Tucson is the heart of Pima County, and the county needs to listen to, we need to listen to the heart. And so I think that we need a more weighted vote, but I also want to provide the caveat that it's important to maintain a regional mindset about that, and thinking about the ways that these systems can help lift up different communities who really need to be lifted up, who are disproportionately impacted by poverty. I think that's really important to sort of think about not just efficiency of funding, but also equitability. And in terms of whether I would stick with it or not, I mean, I think coalition building is so important. I wouldn't be able to say, no, I'm not going to buy into it, or yes, I'm definitely going to stay with it, without consulting with my colleagues. I really see the model of city council as a collaborative, sort of team approach. It's not really very influential or impactful if you're the sole no vote in a situation. So I think it's important to bring people on board, so to speak. Thank you.
Thank you. So let's see. We have, there are 80% of the homes inside the city of Tucson are currently over 50 years old. There are 280,000 houses in Metro Tucson that were built before national energy standards. The question is, what should the city do to help Tucsonans to tackle the billions of dollars of deferred maintenance and energy efficiency upgrades? And Mr. Kozachik, you're up first on this one.
In privately owned homes or publicly owned buildings?
We're talking about homes.
Okay. Well, first of all, we have access to federal dollars, and there's the city of Tucson standing alone is not going to fix the infrastructure needs of private homes throughout the community. But we have certainly access to federal dollars that, frankly, on the last 4 years were severely diminished, and thankfully they're starting to ramp up again. But incorporating those dollars into local initiatives, we have home repair assistance programs that are very important for us to continue to fund locally. But the reality is the city is going to rely on federal funding and grant money to help people upgrade their homes. We're partnering with Pima County very effectively. We just put $30 million in the last federal dollar allocation, the CARES money. We have another $30 million coming for that through the next round through the Biden administration. But those are one-time dollars. And so the moving forward, helping people upgrade and maintain the efficiency of their homes is going to be reliant on a lot of federal assistance and Pima County cooperation with the city.
So, okay, thank you. Ms. Schubert.
Yeah, I've been thinking about this issue a lot lately, sort of walking around different neighborhoods and noticing things like homes that have their doors open because it's hot, but it's still cooler to have their door open than try to use their AC unit that's poorly maintained. I think a lot about things like, when you walk past a window and you can feel the whoosh of air and it's like, this place is not insulated. I certainly think that federal dollars are an important, it's pretty much, one of the most significant ways that we can support these homeowners. I think it's important to call attention to how disproportionately this impacts communities that are low income, communities that are traditionally marginalized, things like that. We definitely need to invest more in local home repair, sort of assistance programs, because this stuff is expensive. And I think we always need to be looking for more ways to support, maintaining and retrofitting, places where people live with insulation and other measures I also, I also think it's important to call attention to, things that are happening at other levels of government, those are still things that we can impact. I really believe in trickle up policymaking and sort of civic engagement being very powerful. So we need to lobby people in, the state and federal government to see extreme heat as, as significant a problem as extreme cold in terms of assisting, with public health of our communities. And so, using systems like request to speak and lobbying for ways to have more consistent revenue streams going toward those needs, I think is really important.
Thank you. Mr. Portella.
So this chimes back to my space into fair housing just a little bit. And when I was doing the analysis of impediments to fair housing, this was a reality as I was canvassing door to door 5 years ago, asking folks, what stops you from doing repairs on your home? What stops your children from keeping the home after you, what's going to stop your kids from keeping the home after you pass, or having those hard conversations and questions with families? And as we know, 80% is the number that we're stuck with. And for me, it's how do we do something that's rather intentional and very purpose-filled with community? And so I think really what we can do at this moment is operate in the confines of where we're at here while advocating for the future. And everything you're going to hear me talk about is for the future of Tucson, and it's all rooted in home. But right now, the City of Tucson Housing and Community Development has the major home repair program. Do a lot of people know about it? Do people know that you can get major home repair starting with increments of $20,000 to $30,000 using community block development grant funds? Do people know that they can get $10,000 for minor home repair using community block development grants, all through Direct Center for Independence, through community home repair projects, or CHRPA, through the Tucson Metropolitan Ministry, or FSL Home? Do people know that their mobile home can be repaired? And that's something with an increment of about $7,500, but do people know that these are here? That is the biggest thing for me. It's making sure that my community right now, we can directly address this need. And the money is there right now. Advocating for the future. I think this is really where we rely on those dollars coming out of the Biden administration. I think from an infrastructure kind of frame of thinking, this could be an infrastructure frame of thinking. Housing and homelessness are infrastructure. And so it's going to take a level of intentionality around a planning process with our planning and development department to say, these are the funds we have now. If we are transitioning to a housing first model, and if we're transitioning to fulfilling the needs of today, we also need to figure out the needs for tomorrow. And so it's going to take that direct lobbying effort on the state level, which Arizona, as we all know, is a little bit restrictive on what cities can do for housing. But I genuinely believe that we can do some on the state and federal levels.
Okay, thank you. And I am just going to sort of wave when we're at around two minutes, just because, so we can keep things going. So we have a question from Jill Jordan Spitz, our editor, and that is specifically for Mr. Portella and Ms. Schubert. Why are you taking on an incumbent candidate, and why do you think you can do better? So Mr. Portella, why don't you take this first, and then we'll go to you, Ms. Schubert.
Pardon me. So I think that lends a hand to really talking about the why I decided to run. The why I decided to run was because I stopped seeing myself in my elected representative. When I worked at the City of Tucson, I was working on the Office of Equity and the Commission on Equitable Housing and Development. Those were my love and my passion work. And as someone who's been here their whole life, I've seen myself in my elected leader at some point in time, but I stopped feeling myself in my elected leader when I put forth the Office of Equity and we got a no vote. So for me, it was, how do you become the change you want to see in your neighborhood? How do you become the change you want to see in your life? And how do you become the change you want to see 2 or 3 generations down the line? And so for me, it was all rooted in home. It's all rooted at the table. It's all rooted in family and creating that table for our community. And so as I think about what is really my differentiating factor between myself and the 12-year incumbent, I genuinely believe I'm a future planner with vision. I'm a future planner who understands where we're at the moment, but genuinely sees where we can go in the future. I'm someone who believes that we need to keep Tucson families in their homes and prioritize our families, our folks who are second and third generation in their homes. We need to look at opportunity and access and to food deserts. We need to focus on mobility justice and accessibility, because we have received a complaint from the Department of Justice that specifically says we need to focus on disability. We've known this for years and we have yet to address it. And my canvassers, all of different abilities, have all said the same thing. We have all seen where we have to ride our scooters in the bike lane, ride and not be able to use our sidewalks because they're buckled. For me, it's that level of intentionality that seems to be missing, that focuses on our clean water, but also beyond just our water, our region, our planning, and all of that. So yeah, that's where I'm at. I feel like I know I can do better.
Thank you. Ms. Schubert.
I don't really like framing it in terms of why do I think I can do better. I'd really love to move beyond the binary way of thinking about good versus bad and instead think about just centering the needs of our community. And I think really what it comes down to is that I kept waiting to hear more talk about the things that we need to improve and work on, and basically changing the status quo. And I didn't hear it. And I feel that we have a lot of challenges on our hands right now, and doing business as usual is what brought us to this point. And so it just seems logical to try to think outside the box and maybe critically examine the ways that we're making our decisions locally. I've heard from many people across the ward from all different walks of life that there's a sense that we keep repeating the same mistakes. And it's hard to not see patterns emerging in different specific situations that different neighborhoods are experiencing. And so I think that for me, it really just comes down to not necessarily doing better, but being different and being the type of leader that doesn't think that admitting when you may have made a mistake, that doesn't mean anything bad or anything to be ashamed of. It's just being a human and having humility. So I think that's what it comes down to for me.
Thank you. Let's see.
Because
So
after you get to say why he wants to do it again for 4 years.
you kind of did in your opening.
All right.
So
There's nothing business as usual about defending our water security. There's nothing business as usual about protecting our central well field. There is nothing business as usual about protecting the residential areas from the excessive rollout of 5G poles. There was nothing business as usual about me taking on the University of Arizona about their absolutely abysmal approach to off-campus testing for COVID, which wound up costing me the job I had for 32 years there. There's nothing business as usual about saying to the RTA, we need to do this public policy in a different way than what we did 20 years ago. There was nothing business as usual about protecting and preserving the Benedictine Monastery. And we had over 800 responses to our survey here out of the ward office that we sent out. And that speaks volumes to the relationships that we have with our constituents throughout Ward 6. And those 800 responses prioritized water security, 5G, they prioritized the RTA issue as well, and the recycle reuse program that I began out of this office. So there's no business as usual going forward out of this office, because I've been advocating for the residents of this community and region in a very unique manner, and will continue to do so.
thank you. So let's see. So after making, this is from our chat, after making extensive investments in historic neighborhoods, residents and federal historic districts are now facing the possibility of losing historic status due to some of the proposed accessory dwelling unit legislation. What is your position on this ADU ordinance? And if I'm this is building like a mother-in-law guest house sort of a thing on your existing property. Is that, so that's what we're talking about, just sort of as the ACUs. And I think Mr. Portella, I think you're first.
That's fine. I'll go first. And so my position on the ADUs, I believe it's an option. Do I think that we're doing it in a way that is respectful to the existing historic status and to our neighbors? Yes and no. The reason why I say that is because I believe that we need to do it in a way where the city is championing the cause and not being kind of a part of the ride. And the reason why I say that is because, yes, we're doing community engagement, but this ultimately gets back to some of the issues we saw with the zoo. And beyond that, when the city says that we're doing community engagement, they don't set real and structural parameters. And so for me, ADUs, there can be a little more intentionality behind them. When I was working in the Ward 1 office as a senior policy advisor, we wanted to do some ADUs in Barrio Viejo. No, not Barrio Viejo, in Barrio Anita. And we went to the neighborhoods and we kept hearing, no, we do not want that. We want single family. No, we want single family. But they kept saying, our community kept saying, we want to live intergenerationally. And so for me, it wasn't an anti-density. It wasn't an anti-historic status. It wasn't all of that. What it was for me is we have to vision, and it's going to require someone to be very intentional. So we work with some local developers, some folks that we know every day who live in Barrio Blue Moon. And they put together some comps that were extremely respectful to the space. And when we represented them back to the community said, wow, these are gorgeous. Our Nana can live in a flat in the backyard. It doesn't mess up our historic status. And so for me, it's taking that level of intentionality, checking in with our community, checking back in with our community, and setting clear and explicit goals at the beginning of how a community engagement process should take place, and seeing an outcome that is going to be change the way we live our lives. And so that's a clear example of how I've seen ADUs take space in a historic neighborhood. Do I support them going into every neighborhood? Not sure, but it's really going to rely on me trusting the experts in our planning and development services, but also in our housing and community development. And I can't wait to have that coalition with city staff.
Thank you. Mr. Kozachik.
Sure. So the concept is great. Everybody, I would think, would embrace the notion of aging in place, granny flat, people having their mom or dad live in the house behind them, and so they can, or caregiver quarter, those kinds of things. But the reality is that other jurisdictions, the state of California is a good example, where they have seen ADUs go into place, and what's happened is they've turned into Airbnbs. They've been purchased and flipped and turned into rental housing. Ward 6 is unique. We've got a lot of small lots. We've got a lot of historic neighborhoods. We've got the university that's immediately surrounded by some well-established historic neighborhoods that have very small lots, and that university wants to grow out. We have right now an ongoing problem with out-of-state student housing developers coming in, buying parcels and flipping them, building student housing, expanding, putting more units. That's the reason we had to pass our group dwelling ordinance, was to stop the expansion of mini dorms in the areas around campus. One backyard at a time is not the most efficient way to expand affordable housing. You'll hear that this is going to be the elixir fixer to the problem of affordable housing. It's not. It's probably the least efficient way to do that. How do you thread the needle? You make it owner occupied in the major residence, and so you're assured of having a resident or a family member in the residence behind. That's a possibility. But there are parking issues. There are size issues right now. As I mentioned, a lot of the lots around in Ward 6 around campus are very small. Right now, I think probably the most effective way, and this is sort of tangentially answering your question, to addressing affordable housing, is commercial zoning allows residential use. Since the pandemic, we've got a lot of vacant storefronts and a lot of shopping centers, Elcon being one of them, where we could expand residential in some of the existing shopping centers, then you don't have the issue of parking restrictions and the size. The current 1,000 square foot ADU right now is too large. But we have planning commission meetings coming up. There will be more public outreach. And so we haven't checked the last box, but right now there are a lot of problems with the idea, and we don't need to exacerbate the problem of student housing and Airbnbs in small residential areas around campus.
Thank you. Ms. Schubert.
Thanks. I definitely agree that we need to safeguard, the character of neighborhoods and to meaningfully include, robust community feedback and to be really mindful about how we're seeking that feedback. I am very fond of the idea of regularly canvassing if I get into office and just knocking on people's doors. I think sometimes we get a little over-reliant on Zoom and email, and it's important to recognize that that only is really inclusive of certain folks. So in addition to community input, I think that it's important to note that this proposed ADU ordinance wouldn't cause historic neighborhoods to lose their status because they're still required to comply by those standards. They're still required to comply by those standards, but I know that I've heard concerns on the part of many constituents that, well, there's not enough inspectors, there's not enough code enforcement, right? So then my thought is, we need to invest in planning and development services, get more folks hired who can be code inspectors to enforce these standards, to preserve, the uniqueness of the neighborhoods that may get ADUs. I agree that it's also not a magic fix for the affordable housing crisis. I think that is a topic that could probably take its own hour-long plus forum, just untangling those ideas. But I do think it's important to underscore that we just need to increase the diversity of different types of housing that we have available. It's not necessarily going to be guaranteed to be affordable because, again, the way that housing costs have gone is affected by a lot of different factors. I think that, in addition to supporting this ADU ordinance because of the need to increase our housing supply, I also appreciate the amnesty idea of being able to help folks who already have ADUs, bring them up to code, bring them up to safety standards, because the thing is some folks, have real needs in their lives, and when they don't get met by the system, they end up building their own ADUs, right? It's like somebody needs a roof over their head. You get into different situations where you're caring for a friend or a family member or a parent who's aging, and you want them to be with you. And we need to provide those options for folks and make it easier for homeowners of different income levels to have ways to take care of the loved ones in their lives. I also think that it's important to note, I really believe in neighborhood self-determination and needing to sort of rebalance the dynamics of these conversations so that neighborhoods have a real significant seat at the table. Thanks.
Thank you. So let's see. So a question, the Tucson City Council, obviously you're making decisions for the whole city, but each ward is different. Could you please select one issue that you think is unique to Ward 1 or is maybe more acute in Ward 1? What is the specific ward issue that you can identify and how you would address that? And I think Mr. Kozachik, you are up first.
It's Ward 6, not Ward 1.
Sorry, Ward 6.
That's okay.
My brain. Thank you. Thank you. I'm in a different meeting. I'm kidding.
Yeah, that's fair.
Ward 6.
Yeah, that's easy. No other ward has a university plopped down right in the middle of it that wants to grow out. And that university is surrounded by well-established historic neighborhoods. We have had since day one, since I started doing this, challenges with the expansion of the university, the desire of the university to grow outward, and the desire of the residents in the neighborhoods that surround the university to preserve their investments in the character of their neighborhoods. We have issues right now that are similar to that with respect to Banner UMC and their need for additional power. So TEP is now proposing to run new transmission lines right down Campbell between the university and Sam Hughes neighborhood, adjacent to Rincon Heights, the same kind of thing. So the university is the most unique characteristic of Ward 6 because of all of the sort of collateral issues that it brings. It brings student housing, it brings this utility need, it brings the expansion issue. So managing that has been a challenge from day one, and it's not going away because the university continues to support things such as a hotel that they wanted to put up on the corner of 6th and Campbell that the zoning examiner correctly said no to. It's coming back to the mayor and council soon, and so we'll see how that goes. But so that's the most unique characteristic of the ward.
Thank you. Ms. Schubert.
Thanks. I agree that the university is a good way to go. The first thought that I had in terms of a unique issue to Ward 6 has to do with the way that we incentivize development and which types of development we are encouraging. I think that it's something that's really affected the way that Ward 6 feels to folks, and it's affected a lot of different things that that people can feel in their daily lives. And I think part of that has to do with changing the ways that our neighborhoods feel when they have an enormous hulking behemoth of a generic looking building, because we don't have local design standards in place. When we see, small legacy businesses that we've loved going to for a very long time have to close their doors because of rising rents, because some property owner realized that they could charge a lot more for that and maybe entice somebody from out of town. And I think that related to that is just how disproportionately resources and funding is allocated across the ward. There are certain neighborhoods that feel very neglected. And when you look at the roads in some neighborhoods versus others, there's a direct correlation. You have neighborhoods with really strong active associations, and those neighborhoods are able to lobby for themselves to advocate. You have other neighborhoods who don't even, I got an email from a woman who doesn't even have a neighborhood association, like where she lives doesn't have a name. And it's mostly apartment complexes with people who rent. But renters make up half of our ward. And so to continue to make folks feel so disregarded, I think is a real missed opportunity. I shouldn't say that. I'm not anti-development, but I do question what types of development, what kind of business we're encouraging. I think that on a systemic level, folks who are looking to do business in our community, they're a part of our community. They should be contributors to making our community stronger and strengthening the social fabric of our neighborhoods. That includes the university. That includes the telecom companies who are trying to put up 5G towers. It even includes PFAS. This is all about asymmetry of power in different discussions, and it's time to rebalance in favor of people. Thank you.
Thanks. Mr. Portella.
So we all have talked a little bit about what I believe is the largest issue to Ward 6. And Miranda said a figure about the majority of Ward 6 being renters. For me, my whole platform is built around home. That's housing, opportunity, mobility justice, and environmental justice. And that takes a holistic approach to how we develop, how we live, how we thrive. But that H is genuinely what I believe is the largest issue for Ward 6. And so with understanding the problem, I feel like I'm the only one that has come up with some real policy, tangential policy, administrative, whatever, that we can make some immediate changes on, and not 12 years of saying we gotta do it one more time. So for me, it's focusing on how do we advocate for renters, and we do that through our Office of Equity and installing a public advocate's position to focus on eviction prevention, but also working in tandem with Pima County on their right to counsel, meaning if you go to court for an eviction, you have someone there to be your legal assistance. So that's how we protect our renters. How do we protect our low income? We focus on source of income protections. Those folks who are getting assistance, whether it's from COVID or the Biden administration, all of these different spaces, we make sure that whatever dollar figure they're using or whatever assistance they're using, it'll be a valid source of income. So instituting source of income protections that says your dollar matters and where you spend it matters. and you should have opportunity from that space. And we've seen that in 12 other states. Also, making sure our aging in placers stay in place. And we know we can do that through the Senior Property Valuation Protections Program and freezing those property taxes for those folks who have lived generationally in their communities and are on the older side of life. They are trying to settle down and still figure out how to stay in place. But also Steve, thank you for bringing up the fact that we can use some of these vacant commercials to find new ways to make sure we create some housing stock. So for me, it's making sure that we take a holistic approach to finding home in place. And that's understanding access to opportunity. Are you waving me off? Or are you saying I got 5 seconds?
I am.
Okay, cool. I appreciate that. But yeah, that's where I'm at, home.
Thank you. Okay, so we've talked a bit about water and the PFAS, the pollution. We are coming up on the end of our hour, so I would like to just give you each a minute. I know that's not enough time to solve the water problems of our community, but what is the thing that the city council can do, that you as a city council member can do to address water security? And with that, actually, let's do a minute 30. And with that, I think, Miranda, you are first.
Thanks. So one thing that immediately sprang to mind for me was the water differential, the proposal to institute differential rates for folks outside the city limits. That's something that City Council voted to move forward with, but there's still discussions around how the revenue from that, what the level, how the revenue from that is going to be used, what level are people going to need to pay an increased rate, things like that. And I definitely think it's crucial to look at the funds that are coming in from that and ensure that those are going toward working families, low-income folks, helping with the water debt that's incurred since the pandemic. I think that this is the type of policy that really excites me because it represents a meaningful change to the way that we've been doing things. And I think that it also represents an intersection of sustainability and equity that really takes into account the fact that water, just like every other issue, disproportionately impacts certain communities more than others. And so I think that, in the face of a lot of opposition too, you have folks who are pretty upset about, less than $10 increases to their bill. And it's like, we're running out of water. So I think it definitely takes leaders who are willing to stick their neck out for policies like this that may not be everybody's cup of tea. And I think relatedly, keeping our urban sprawl in check and looking for ways to more intelligently use the space that we already have within our city limits. So both of the other candidates talked about adaptive reuse of buildings, which is also something I'm a fan of. So yeah, I think those are the main places that my mind goes to. Thanks.
Thanks. Mr. Portella. Water security.
Water security, I want to be very specific. So this is the E in my platform, which is environmental justice. And I really want to focus on a lot of pick up where Steve left off. I think he's been a real champion of focusing on PFAS and making sure that he built that coalition of folks that are working with Department of Justice, working with the military, Davis-Monthan Air Force Base. For me, it's going to be using those Biden administration dollars, that $2 billion that's going to come out of the infrastructure bill, which is ever changing. But I really want to use that on focusing on a stormwater collection or stormwater infrastructure fund. How do we keep it going? How do we focus on the infrastructure itself? And how do we get water in our ground immediately? And so we do that by the Green Stormwater Infrastructure Fund, which prioritizes equity while also reducing the heat vulnerability. Flood reduction through prioritizing watersheds and expanding our tree canopy. But I want to do it very cost sensitively. And we do that by using the federal dollars that are going to be coming right to our neighborhoods here in the next few days, months, over the next few years, and incentivizing infill and focusing on reducing sprawl. And so those are the few different ways that I have in mind. And it starts with that stormwater infrastructure fund. And that comes from a thought that I learned from our planning and development services. When I worked as a senior policy advisor, I wanted to get very specific on how we collate some of that water. And that's how they felt we can get this immediate solution and the city of Tucson own it.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Ksachik.
Thanks. So water security is the number 1, 2, and 3 issues that I'm just championing. This is, without water, it's an existentially important issue of this region, not just the city of Tucson or Ward 6. So how do we get our arms around it? Number 1, we continue to buy our full allocation of CAP water. We buy 144,000 acre feet a year, and we make about 100,000 of those acre feet. We have to continue to do that. Our tiered water rate structure, it incentivizes conservation. We have to continue with that right now. To credit to the people in this region, we are using about 1994 levels of water despite our population growth. So that's to the credit of the people in this region and the city council for being forward thinking, putting rainwater harvesting and rebate programs in place. But the reality is that we've had to shut down 24 wells, and we had to shut down our TARP, our treatment facility, 2 weeks ago. So getting our arms around PFAS, getting our arms around the fact that the DOD, the Air National Guard, and 3M and other product manufacturers are the ones who are responsible for this contamination, and our ratepayers shouldn't be paying a penny for that, for the remediation. We have spent or committed over $50 million already through Tucson Water, and so the 3M and military are the ones who are going to have to foot this bill. So right now, Tucson Water is telling me that we got to play nice with the DOD. That's fine as long as they're partnering with us, but they're going to have to get their checkbooks out and start writing checks to build treatment plants all over the central well field and over by the Tucson International Airport because those plumes are moving more quickly than the process is moving in terms of getting them to the table. So my concern is that the DOD continues to slow walk it. The city is going to have to come out of pocket to build treatment plants before DOD is ready to pay for it. And I'm a minute and a half, isn't even close to being able to. And I get it, everyone had a minute and a half, but this is a huge issue for this region, and we can't take our foot off the gas pedal right now.
Thank you. So now I'd like to give everyone a minute to make a closing statement. And I think, let's see, Mr. Ksachik, you're up first.
Okay. First of all, thank you all for carving out the time. These are incredibly important positions. We are at the ward office, your direct touch in government. And my office is top drawer when it comes to constituent services. And I don't take a backseat to anybody in terms of my advocacy, not only for my constituents and my neighbors, but for the regional issues that we're confronting. And we mentioned several of them. My record's clear for all to see. We have some extremely important issues that are in front of us. We mentioned PFAS, we mentioned the RTA, we mentioned 5G, water rates, budget security. So there are some important issues going forward. These jobs are about more than slogans. They're about protecting the rights and the interests of our neighbors. We have 42 registered neighborhood associations in Ward 6. Most of them are very active. We got a direct touch with each of them. But before I end, I want to ask people to participate in one other thing that's not related to this, and that is the Independent Redistricting Commission is going to be in Tucson on August 7th and 8th to hold public hearings. Go to irc.az.gov and you can find out where those public hearings are. It is how we get our voice in the conversation about congressional districting and how this region can be better represented once they redraw those maps. And I wanted to drop that in before we ended this. But anyway, that's all I got. Thanks. And thank you for the time, Sarah. And Sarah and Sarah.
Yes.
Go.
Okay. So Ms. Schubert.
Thanks. Thanks for the opportunity to join you all today to talk a little bit more. I agree with the incumbent that the work of city government is more than just slogans, but I think it's important to note it's also more than just fights. And the point was made earlier that fighting on these different fronts is a challenge to business as usual. I would actually push back against that and say that it's a symptom of the fact that business as usual is not functioning in an ideal way. When we continue to have to fight 5G, other challenges to the unique character of our neighborhoods, when these discussions come up over and over again, when it seems like every month another piece of public space is being threatened to be put behind a paywall, these speak to larger systemic problems in terms of what we're prioritizing with our decision-making processes and how we're including the public in those decisions. I think the PFAS issue, another systemic thing to point out about that is it's not just about holding accountability. It's also about ensuring that there's adequate funding of enforcing, standards and things like that, and cleaning it up. I'm here to take a systems approach to these challenges and to invite people to the table and to model an accessible, approachable, knowledgeable way of leading. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Portella.
I just want to underscore something that Steve has brought up as well as the IRC. We did an education last night on how you can go through a program and kind of see what the map that would be beneficial for your community. I can't wait for us to talk more about this. But jumping into my exit, thank you so much for the opportunity. This is the community that helped raise me. So my whole career has been dedicated to centering those voices of our everyday community. And Lucha and our voice, our vote, all of these folks have genuinely jumped on board because they know what it's like to feel for community, to love our home, and that's housing opportunity, mobility justice, and environmental justice. But we deserve representation that prioritize our neighborhood concerns and future plans it out. And so for me, I learned all of my professional achievements through my personal experience. I learned about accessibility as a kid riding in lowriders through Reed Park when you could literally ride on the inside of Reed Park with my uncles. I learned about economic development from those dollar tickets and spring training at Tucson Electric Park. And I learned about mobility justice, just riding my bike throughout the city of Tucson, but also that continued learning when I'm out with my canvassers who are wheelchair bound and they can't ride on the sidewalk and have to be in the bike lane. We have so much further to go and I can't wait to get there with you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We really appreciate everyone's time and attention, and this will be posted online at tucson.com/opinion, and the previous one we did with Ward 3, we did that on Wednesday. That'll be up also as well. So thank you so much for joining us, and we will see you later.